Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Today, I thought I'd come on and talk a little bit about a question that I get asked a whole lot. And I just recently was asked again. So I thought, okay, what better time to do a video? And that video is, how do you deal with confetti? But first of all, before we get started, I want to welcome all of you to my channel. My name is Karen, and this is NeedleBugg, and here you will find lots of things about cross-stitch and hardanger embroidery. Mainly, I focus on educational type things. You'll get tips and tricks and how-tos and all of those things about both techniques and sometimes some other types of embroidery thrown in. So, thank you for joining. Thank you for coming back for those of you who are subscribers. Thank you to all the new people that have stopped by here of late. I've noticed a big increase in my subscriber count, and I want to thank each and every one of you and welcome each and every one of you for stopping by and clicking on play. I know there's a lot of videos out there to watch these days, and thank you for stopping by mine. I really do appreciate it, and you know, this community is the best community out there. So with that, my dear friends, let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about how do we deal with confetti stitching. It is a dilemma sometimes, isn't it? How do you deal with it? Well, my first suggestion is if you use paper, find a method of marking your stitches off so that you know what you've stitched and where you need to stitch. What I used to do years and years and years ago when I first, not first started cross-stitching, but when I stitched my first pieces that were full coverage, I actually made a working copy of my pattern, but what I did with that working copy is I cut it into sections. And then I marked those sections so that I would know where they fall in the chart. I actually made two copies, and one copy I would mark off the sections and I would number them like A1, A2, A3. So 1 being the rows down, A being columns across, so that I knew exactly which piece I needed next. So I would cut them into probably, I don't remember exactly, but somewhere around the 30 by 30 sections or even 40 by 40. I didn't want them too small, but I didn't want them too big either. And then what I would do is I had a gazillion different colored markers. And I would go on that section and I would pick a symbol. And I would sit and highlight in, say, blue, all the colors of that symbol. And then I would stitch those. And that was in the days before gridded fabric. So it was counting, and it was getting to that next symbol. And that's why I didn't make my sections too big, because I didn't want to travel too far, because that was always a chance of miscounting. So once I completed, say, all the blue stitches, then I would pick another color, say orange, for example, and I would mark the next symbol, and I would color all those symbols on that block, and I would stitch those. And I'd work that way until I got down to just a few symbols left. And at that point, I really didn't need to color them in anymore, because I could pick them out very easily. Once I finished that piece of paper, I moved on to the next and did the same thing. So that's one way to manage your confetti. If, for example, sorry about that, my calendar was telling me something. If you use paper. Now, my recommendation for those that you want to go electronic is either get Pattern Keeper or Markup RXP, whichever one. That being said, let me say this about markup. I do like it. I do use it. I'm not using it for everything. However, if you are going to use it, my experience, and my experience only, has been that it works smoother and better on an iPad as opposed to an Android. On an Android, my experience, and my experience only, has been that it's a bit choppy. It takes a little bit for it to do what it needs to do. So when I use it on my iPad. I do not use it on my Samsung. Pattern Keeper, however, is strictly an Android app. As far as is one better than the other, equally. Each one has its pros, each one has its cons, and really it's just a matter of what type of tablet you have, what you can, if you can afford to buy, if you have an iPad but you can afford to buy an Android and just use that for Pattern Keeper, all well and good, go for it. The choice is yours. You know what electronics you have, what electronics you can afford, and decide on one of them. But if you want to go electronic, I would highly say you need one or the other. You either need Pattern Keeper or you need Markup, one or the other. It is going to make your life so much easier. Then next, after you have decided how you're going to handle your chart, whether it be you're going to do paper, whether you're going to get Pattern Keeper, whether you're going to get Markup, it's up to you. But what you want to decide next is what method of stitching are you going to use? What is your preferred method? Do you prefer to stitch? I have notes over here, so I keep looking. But do you prefer to stitch cross country? And that's what I was doing years ago when I cut my chart into little sections and stitched each section as I went. And what I did was I stitched by color, as I explained. I stitched by color cross country within that section. So that's one method. If you can stitch cross country and do parking. You can stitch a 10 by 10 block and park in adjacent blocks. How you stitch within that 10 by 10 block, again, is find your preferred method. Some people go cross country within a 10 by 10 block and park in the next block down. Some people go line by line within a 10 by 10 block and park. If you go line by line, well, let's flip you to a different screen so we can look at a chart, and that way some of this will make a little bit more sense. So let's flip over here. Here we go. So let's look at this 10 by 10 block. Okay, and hopefully my pointer is big enough that you can see it. All right, so some people will pick this U-turn, I'll call it, and they will stitch every incidence of it in this 10 by 10 block, and then they will look down in this next block and see where does that symbol go again, which is right here, and they'll park their thread there. Now, if you are going to park, the biggest recommendation I can make for you is always park in the same corner of this square. So if you are stitching from the top down, for example, and you start your stitch in the bottom left-hand corner, then you want to park in the bottom left-hand corner. If you stitch from the bottom up, you want to park your thread and you stitch top right to bottom left. You want to park in the top right corner. And you want to do that every time, so that when you get to that block and you have that thread sitting there, you know it is in the bottom. Let me do this. Okay. Okay. So there, I have it marked bottom left corner. So when I get to this stitch, I know that this thread parked right here goes to this block. Okay. That's the one thing you want to make sure you also do if you're using one of these apps is when you park a thread, mark it. Because heaven forbid we all miscount, especially when you're talking about an area that has a bajillion colors in it, like this one does. You want to be sure to mark off your stitches as you stitch them, and you want to be sure to mark where you park them. Okay, so some people will stitch every occurrence of this color in this block and then park it in the block below or the block to the side. Some people like to stitch line by line and keep going across and down and across. Now I'm going to assume that you're stitching one X at a time. Okay, I'm just going to make that assumption. There are several ways to stitch line by line that will help you to deal with the confetti. For me, that is my best way to work my way through it, is to go line by line, and I will either, I have to do it on here. I keep wanting to do it on the screen and I have to do it here on the tablet. Okay, so let's highlight the arrows or the U-turns. Okay, so what you could do is several different things. You could stitch this stitch, mark it off, park it here. Okay. Then you could stitch this stitch, mark it off. Now, there's no place to park it. Let's see, can we park it below? Oh, but there is. You can park it down here because that's, well, it's a little more than 10, but you have to decide how far are you willing to go. Is it to your advantage to park it down here? And there it's 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. It's 16 rows away. Or would you rather park it here? Either one is acceptable. So let's say, for sake of saving thread, we're going to park it. Let me make you bigger again. We're going to park it over here. So we're going to mark that. Then we're going to go back and do the next stitch. Okay, we're going to stitch that. Whoops. We're going to stitch that one, mark it off, and park it here. And now this way is a lot of threading, but we're going to proceed through the line in that manner. When we have all of these stitched, then we're going to drop down to the next line. And what I do is then go from right to left. So I'm going to go to this symbol next, we'll call it a TP. We're going to stitch that, park it here. We're going to then stitch this one and park it here. So what we're doing is just working one stitch at a time and parking in the next occurrence of that stitch. So that's one way to go line by line. And that's one way to deal with confetti and get you through those heaviest parts. Okay, so now let's select, oh, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, I'm just going to highlight. Okay, what did I do here? Oh, I got to undo this. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to highlight these and I'm going to frog them. And then I'm going to get rid of this. Okay. Now, the other thing that makes this a bit less needle threading is you can highlight this symbol. No, wait, I want this, the U-turn. Okay. You highlight the U-turn. You can stitch this. Whoops, did it again. You can stitch this, here, and here. Okay. And then you're going to go back this row, and then this row you're going to come across. So you would park it here. Oops. You would park it here. And then those stitches are complete. So you can stitch all of one color on the line. Okay. Then you would pick your next symbol. Okay. You would stitch that and park it over here. Then you would pick your next symbol. Stitch this and park it here. And so forth. So that you would stitch by color through the line, park it in the next incident of that symbol, and work your way through the confetti. Now, the good thing is, whether you stitch by column, which would be this column, you'd stitch down this 10 stitch wide and all the way as far down as you wanted to go, or whether you stitch on the diagonal, like I have this marked, I just forgot what I was going to say. Okay. Okay. I'm here now. No matter which way you stitch, whether it's column or diagonal, what most often will happen is you will get through this confetti area and then get to an area that is much less heavy with color changes, so that this will not last for the whole chart. Well, I shouldn't say that because it really does depend on what chart you're stitching. If you're stitching an Amy Stewart chart, that whole thing is confetti. And you know what, and it's, which is why I say pick a chart you love. Pick a chart you love and can't live without, because that's going to get you through all of this. And know that on most charts, like this particular chart that I'm looking at here is Autumn Church. And in most charts, you're going to have an area that is just polluted with confetti. And then you're going to have places that aren't. I mean, let's look at, well, let me get rid of this stuff first so that I don't get myself confused, which that's such a short trip sometimes. Wrong that. And let's get rid of these. Okay. Sometimes it is a rather short trip. Okay, so you can see where I am, and you can see some of this I was doing cross country. Okay, that's the next. Wait, where am I at here? Oh, okay. I'm working down this column. This is I was doing cross country. This is where I am currently at. So I'm in a little bit of confetti yet. And you can see where I have all my parked threads marked. And in this, until I get down to maybe past this 70 line, then things will start to get better again. Okay, then my color tone changes aren't as dramatic. There we go. Aren't as dramatic down in here as they were up here. But here's why. So let's look at the PDF. Okay. So where I'm stitching right now is up in here. Okay, my diagonal is right about here. So it makes sense. This is pretty straightforward because it's the frame. The window frame is pretty straightforward and not a lot of confetti because it's a window frame. It's all browns. Where the confetti is this. So that's when I went stitch by stitch instead of line by line. Okay. Or you could, on a diagonal, the way people, you could do it, all of the color between in the 10 by 10 diagonal block. You could do that also. So there are many, many different styles and ways of stitching out there. The trick is to find the one that works the best for you. So you got to pick your style. Pick the way you want to stitch. Experiment, and don't be afraid to experiment all on the same project. You do not have to start a new project to start a new method of stitching. you can start on that project. So on this, it's very easy to, okay, I have all these park threads here. It would be very easy to stitch just stitch by stitch, line by line. That's what I'm doing right now. It would be easy to switch it to color complete. So if I'm doing the question mark, oh gosh, I always want to do it in the screen and I forget I have to do it on the tablet. If I want to do the question marks, here's my diagonal line. I wish I could make that a bit darker, but I can't. I could stitch all the question marks in this area, in this, is it a pentagon? Oh God, I can't tell you. In this area, stitch all your question marks. When you have those stitched, pick your next color, stitch all of those. Park in this next, in the diagonal, but in this next area. So you could do that too. There's just endless amount of ways. You could not park at all. You could say, I'm going to stitch all of this flower in this oops, go back to the flower. Forgot to change my thing here. Here we go. I'm going to stitch all of this flower the rest of the way down this whole diagonal, and then I'm done with that color. So you can color complete within the diagonal or within the column. Either way. So the biggest trick is, firstly, find a method to mark your chart. Mark your chart in some manner, whichever way you think works the best for you. Only you can decide that. Mark your chart. Pick your method and stick to it. Give whatever method you're testing a fair shot. Don't just do it for an hour and say, oh yeah, this ain't working. Because it might just be the area of the chart that you're in. So, give it a day or 2 days or 3 days before you decide, no, this just isn't going to work for me. And then find another method that you think will work. The biggest thing, another big thing, is take your time. This is not a race. This is a hobby. I'm going to leave the chart now. We're going to go back to the full screen. Here we go. There we go. Take your time. It's not a race. This is a hobby. It's supposed to be fun. So step back, relax, enjoy the process. Some people are process stitchers. Some people are the kind of stitchers where I got to have a finish, I got to have a finish, I got to have a finish. And that's okay too. But when you're dealing with projects of this magnitude, and first of all, they're big, they're time consuming. Those of you that have been with me for a while know that Stitcher's Retreat took me 5 years. You often see people in the groups saying, oh, I finally finished XYZ after 7 years, 10 years, whatever. They're projects that you are not going to complete in a week, in a month, in a year, unless you know some tricks that I don't, because I have not figured out. And again, it depends on the size. Okay, I did Christmas stockings for the grandkids, and each one of those took me 6 months. So I spent a year and made 2 stockings. But then again, you look at the size. They are not the size of something like this. This particular chart is 346,000 plus stitches. I have 1.13% completed. So be prepared. Be prepared to spend a long time, which is even more important to find a method. Find the thing, the way of stitching that works for you. Find the way to deal with your chart so that you always know where you are in that chart. Whether it be cross country, whether it be parking, whether it be color completing within an area, find the one that works the best for you. Take your time. It's not a race. And most importantly, give yourself the permission to be okay if you make a mistake. Tell yourself, it's not the end of the world. I made a mistake. It's okay. 9 times out of 10, that mistake can be fixed. Okay? If you stitch in one of these methods, you probably are going to find your mistake rather quickly. And then if you have to frog, it's not a whole lot of stitches to be frogged. True confessions, if I put a color in the wrong spot and it does not affect anything, I have told myself that that's okay. Let it there. I'm not going to change it. I'm not going to frog it. It's okay. It does not affect the overall design. Chances are that wrong color is probably just a shade different than the color that it's supposed to be. So it's not going to affect the thing. If it is going to make a difference, like it's in somebody's face, it's an eyeball or whatever, take the correct color and stitch over it. Easily done, easily fixed. But give yourself permission to do that. I have done that quite a few times, and you can't see the difference. What I do when I do that is I pull the tension just a smidge tighter so that it does cover up that mistake underneath it. But give yourself permission to be okay with those kinds of things. Because heaven forbid, none of us are perfect. We are all going to make a mistake one time or another, multiple times. And again, true confession, the other thing I do is if I am in a high confetti area, and I call them one-stitch wonders, I have one stitch of a color, and that color is not seen for miles around. I am not going to thread a needle and stitch that one stitch with that color. I don't do it. I stitch that stitch with the color of thread that is in my needle. So give yourself permission to do things like that. 9 times out of 10, again, it is just a shade off of the color you're already using. Yes, I will confess that yes, it probably is there to add a highlight, or it probably has some kind of purpose. But in the overall grand scheme of things, when you are looking at that piece up on the wall, you are not going to know that that one stitch is not stitched in the color that it's called for. So give yourself permission to be okay with those kinds of things. That's one of the things that gets frustrating about dealing with confetti is the one stitch wonders. You know, I often ask myself, and I don't know the answer, but I often ask myself, why? Why is that one stitch there? Why? You know, I often look at the color key of a chart and go down and see how many stitches are there of this color or that color or, any color. And I know that this chart is 346,500 stitches. And I'll look down because Pattern Keeper and Markup will tell you how many stitches there are of a particular color. And here I already found one. In this piece, color number 209 has 42 stitches. 42. Now, that is probably in some of the flowers. So, okay. We can do that one. Let's see what else. 718, 38 stitches. 799, 31 stitches. So I asked myself, are those, 38, 44? Are you going to believe this? I don't believe that I have used that color yet. In this whole chart, there are 2 stitches. And I ask myself, why? Why are there 2 stitches? Why is that color there at all? Same thing with 38, 48. I may have used that color. Don't quite remember, but I only have 29 more stitches and that color is at 0. Why? Cannot some of these colors be combined with whatever color you're using that is the shade next to it? Granted, I get that that is how they get it to look like a picture. But seriously, if it's under 50 stitches, are those few 2 stitches really going to make a difference? So, true confessions, I don't always thread my needle for 1 stitch of a color and do that 1 stitch wonder. But that's not just me. You have to know what you can live with. You have to know what is going to work for you. There are people that if it says, and this is okay, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this. All I'm saying is stating a fact that there are people that I have to follow the chart exactly the way it's written. And I cannot alter that at all. And that's okay. That is fine. Again, a decision you make for yourself. Myself, on the other hand, I'm not above fudging and I'm not above substituting. But I'm okay with that. So, I think, now that I've rambled on almost 45 minutes, that those things are probably the best recommendations I can give you with how to deal with confetti. So just to recap, they are use Pattern Keeper or Markup or find a way to handle your paper chart that you know what is stitched, what isn't stitched, if you have parked a thread, yada, yada. Come up with a method of stitching that works the best for you. whether it be color completing, cross country, parking, diagonal, columns, work line by line, stitch by stitch, any of the methods we've talked about. Take your time. It's one stitch at a time. It's not a race. Take your time. Think about. The other thing is, don't try and watch a TV show that you really want to watch and work in confetti at the same time, because it's not going to work. You're going to make mistakes for sure, for sure. So work on the confetti when you can concentrate just on that. Don't try and do other things when you're working in a high confetti area. And lastly, give yourself permission that it's okay. It's okay if you make a mistake. It's just okay. It is what it is. We look at how can we do it differently? How can we fix it? Can we live with the way it is? And we move on. And we move on. In the grand scheme of things, hanging up on the wall, you are never going to know. If you people knew all the mistakes that were in my Stitcher's Retreat that's hanging up on the wall, you would not believe it, because it doesn't look like it, but there are tons. As well as the Christmas stockings that I did for the kids. There are tons of mistakes. They're okay. It's fine. It is not the hill I'm going to die on. Not the hill at all. So, my friends, as I said, I think that is the best recommendations I can give you for how to deal with high areas of confetti. I hope that you have found this helpful and give some of the things a try, experiment, find what works for you. So with that, I am going to leave you today, and I will see you next time. Have a great rest of your week. And remember, there are no rules in cross stitch. The only rules in cross stitch are the ones you make for yourself. So have a great week, and I will see you next time.